So the format for today's webinar is first we're going to do a little bit of an overview of Virginia Sea Grant, talk a little bit about our program, some of the priority areas that we have, which are relevant to the fellowship programs. We're going to go through the 3 fellowships that we are planning to administer this year. One of those, the Virginia Sea Grant Graduate Research Fellowship, has already been released. Today, we got another confirmation that the 2 Sea Grant NMFS, the National Marine Fisheries Fellowships, are coming out shortly. They expect to have them out in the next 2 to 3 days. So please note when I talk about those, a lot of that information is anticipated, but it has not been released yet. And I'll review that too when we get to those. And then we're going to have our alumni panel share some of their experiences and insight based on their time as fellows, recommendations for you as potential applicants, and share some of their tips, takeaways, and also I'm going to stay on after the hour is over. So if you have specific questions that are relevant to you, the first questions that you put into the registration form that we don't touch on in this first hour, please feel free to hang out. I'll be here until about 5:30 and I can address some of those specific questions as we come in. So the first question that we usually get is related to Virginia Sea Grant in general, a little bit about who we are as a program, what our priorities are. So Virginia Sea Grant is one of 34 programs across the nation. For every one of these programs, they're a little bit different. And Virginia Sea Grant is no different from that. We are one of a few programs that are consortium or partner programs, where we have 7 institutional partners scattered out across the state. And with those present unique opportunities. And we have a lot of our extension partners that are actually residing at those universities, so we can talk about as well. We have 4 functional areas or 4 strategic focus areas that are relevant to students that are applying for our programs. The focus areas are centered around healthy coastal ecosystems and communities, resilient communities and economies, and then also sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, and environmental literacy and workforce development. For our fellowship program, any students that are applying are obviously part of the environmental literacy workforce development focus area. That's why we invest so much time and energy into our fellowship program. We get a lot of questions about eligibility and relevancy of fellowship research proposals to our program. And a lot of those, safe, sustainable seafood, healthy coastal ecosystems, and resilient communities, there are many ways that our students that are supported can align with one or more of those strategic focus areas. And I'm happy to talk to you about your individual research projects if you're interested. But generally, if you're doing work in coastal Virginia or within the marine sector, generally, if that research is done somewhere in the mid-Atlantic, there's probably ways to tie that in to being relevant to Virginia Sea Grant and applying for our funding. Now, for the fellowship programs and why we invest so much time and energy into them, we see these as great opportunities to support graduate students inside the Commonwealth at our partner universities and other universities that are doing research relevant to Virginia Sea Grant. We also invest a lot of time and energy into professional development training for our fellows, which you get to hear about today. And we have a professional development coordinator that is now on staff. The only one in the Sea Grant network is actually in Virginia. And with that, we invest a lot of time into a couple different professional development arenas. And those typically focus on science communication, science policy or science management, and that interface where science is being used, and also collaborative and interdisciplinary team science. So working across different disciplinary boundaries, architects, engineers, working with law students, and natural scientists. So those are all highlighted on our website. And as you're thinking about fellowship applications, keep those in mind. Your professional goal statement, some of your other materials might need to reference those, or if you are supported as any of our fellows, postgraduate or graduate research, you would have access to those professional development training programs. Additionally, you can see through a lot of our opportunities that we've put energy into helping students partner up with a professional mentor. Those mentors can serve in a lot of different capacities and roles. And really, that relationship between the fellow and the mentor is specialized for your goals and for your research projects. And we can talk more about that in detail as well. So as just kind of an overview of some eligibility requirements, funding levels, and dates, we wanted to share these. I noted that The two NIPS fellowships, the Population and Ecosystem Dynamics and the Marine Resource Economics, are both anticipated at this point, and we believe those are going to come out in the next few days. So I would expect to see those in an announcement email coming out from Virginia Sea Grant, likely in the next week or so. With those, do keep an eye out for it, and if you're interested in applying, reach out to me so we can talk about what may have changed from previous years. Now, for the Virginia Sea Grant Graduate Research Fellowship, we do get questions about whether or not you need to apply for a full 2 years or a full $40,000. You do not have to request the full period of time. We've had applicants apply for 1 year funding, 1.5 or 2 years, and depending on if you're going to graduate over a summer semester, it may only be for 14 to 16 months. So keep that in mind and know that you are eligible. We know that your proposal will likely be scaled for that period of time. So if you're applying for a single year, you might not be applying and asking to do as much work and for as much funding as you will be if you're asking for 2 years of support. For the Graduate Research Fellowship, we have a few different goals for this program that you're going to see highlighted in the way that we're reviewing the materials and the materials that we're requesting from you. So we're really looking to support exceptional students from a broad range of disciplines. So if you're working in landscape architecture, engineering, your disciplinary boundaries do not, in this case, make you ineligible. In fact, we encourage you to apply. And we are seeing a lot more applications coming in from a broader range of disciplines every single year. And we're really excited about that. And we know that there are some considerations that you might have as a professional student that research students might not have. So if you're curious about how to balance a professional degree program with applying for this because you are doing some type of research or knowledge generation for a thesis chapter or a dissertation, we can definitely talk through that and think about specific requirements and considerations that you might want to have in mind as you're applying. In addition to just financial support, like I said, we have professional development training opportunities, but we are looking for finding ways to support our fellows through helping them build their networks and through other ways that we can help bring in stakeholders that we regularly work with as a Sea Grant program that might be able to support you now doing your research and also into the future. There are a lot of ways you can learn more. So this webinar is one of those. We also have a number of videos, testimonials, and some blog posts from our past fellows, which are great resources to look into to hear about their experiences. We do also receive a number of questions that are frequently asked questions. I'm always happy to answer those. You should know too that some of our guides have a lot of the answers to those frequently asked questions. Specifically two that I'm calling out here, this relationship that you're developing with a professional mentor, there's a 2-page PDF guide on the fellowship website that kind of goes through our goals, the reflections that we have from talking to some of our alumni members and those recommendations that they've given us about what's really been of value to them. Additionally, this year we released a new guide for developing budgets and budget justifications. There are a number of examples, which are actually highlighted in the gray box in the bottom right-hand corner of this sheet, that'll actually go through text that has been submitted in the past. It's been approved by the sponsor programs office that we work with in our fiscal office. And if you have questions about the level of detail that you need to have in your budget justification for different line item costs, this guide will be a step-by-step guide for how to put together those forms. In some ways, you might be able to copy and paste some of the text out of this to create a draft budget that you then work with your business manager and advisor before you submit it into your sponsor programs office. So definitely look for that and review it if you have any budget questions. Additionally, we get questions about level of detail for data sharing plans and some questions related to EC grants. We have a few guides on there. If you ever have questions about those, you're more than welcome to reach out, and we can answer some of those as we go through the latter part of this conversation too. So what are the important tips? And we'll focus a lot of the conversation today on some of these as well. One of the main things that we recommend for all fellowship applicants, even beyond the Graduate Research Fellowship, is to consider having references that can talk about your past experiences and skills from a different perspective than your academic advisor. A lot of times the example that I give is if you have co-advisors that you're working with for a PhD program that you just entered into, those co-advisors have probably known you for a similar period of time, and they've known you working on the same project and have a very similar perspective. So if a review panel were to look at those letters, read one, they might pick up the second one and it looks very similar to them. Whereas if you had a previous employer, someone that you worked with through an internship or during your undergraduate degree, sometimes those perspectives can be different and provide some additional insight to your background and what you bring to the fellowship program. So consider who might be able to write a very strong letter of recommendation for you, but speak to your skills and experiences from a different point of view than your major professor. Make sure you do look through the announcement, paying particular attention to the three-stage review process for this fellowship: relevancy, a technical review panel, and then interviews, and the different evaluation criteria that are going to be considered within each. It's important for your proposal narrative to hit on why your research is relevant to Virginia Sea Grant and the Commonwealth of Virginia, so you can make through the first stage to actually make it to the technical review panel. So you want to make sure that you are considering the full suite of review processes and the evaluation criteria for each one of those. You should also work very closely with your professional mentor once you've selected one. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is this is an additional person that you're collaborating with, you're going to be working with throughout the 2 years of your fellowship program, and hopefully more even after the fellowship ends. You want them to come in and think about ways that they can bring some insight, maybe some professional skills or technical skills to the beginning part of your fellowship. Are there questions that you could ask through your research project that they need as a resource manager or somebody that's working in a field that's relevant to your activities? They might be able to provide some perspective there where you can actually tweak your methodology and be able to answer some of the questions that they're currently grappling with and really create a mutually beneficial relationship right from the start of your fellowship program. Also think about the way that they're going to write their letter of commitment. If your proposal is outlining 3 different objectives that you have, but those aren't referenced in the letter of commitment coming from your mentor, it might be unclear to the review panel whether or not you have a strong relationship and that you're on the same page. So you want them as involved as you can in the proposal process, so it's clear to the reviewers that you're on the same page. Their letter is kind of documenting and showing that they're going to be able to add value to your fellowship by helping support each one of those mentorship and professional outreach goals that you have. And then lastly, definitely take some time. I know graduate students don't do this often enough. Reflect on your short and long-term goals. It's hard to do that when you're early in a graduate program. I can speak from experience reflecting back many too many years from now. But think about the experiences and the things you can gain outside of your current graduate program and outside the activities that you're doing now that are going to get to where you want to be after you finish a master's or a PhD or a JD, and help you get to that next stage in your career. And think about how your mentor can help give you those experiences now. Are there meetings that you can go into that you would never have been able to get into originally, but now you can be a fly on the wall in those meetings? Think about those opportunities. And then last but not least, and I'd recommend even doing it after today's webinar, reach out to your sponsor programs office in collaboration with your advisor and your business manager to let them know that you're planning to apply. There's going to be internal deadlines, and you want to be well aware of what those deadlines are in advance. They could be 1 to 2 weeks before Virginia Sea Grant's deadline, which means you might need to have your budget and maybe some of your narrative complete shortly after you get back from Thanksgiving break. And you want to know when that period of time is and which application elements they're going to want to review. They may not need to see your letters of recommendation and some of your other materials, so you can save those and work on them later. I referenced that the NIMS Fellowship has not been released yet, but we did receive an email, like I said earlier, that we are expecting it in the next few days, possibly as early as tomorrow. So do look for that to be released soon. There's 2 different NIMS fellowships, one that is focused on population ecosystem dynamics. This is really a quantitative-based fellowship program. And the way that the NOAA NIMS office view this fellowship program is a way to get really highly talented students that are very skilled, especially in kind of quantitative analysis, that are working at universities with mentors, and then partner them up with someone who's working in one of the NIMS regional offices or in Silver Springs, or maybe even at a university where you may be at and you're not aware that they're there. And the idea is to help formally train the next generation of fishery scientists that might be coming in. And they do that through a whole bunch of ways. Regular meetings that happen annually where the fellows that are in the current cohort come together, but also through this really close relationship that an applicant would have with their NIMS mentor. Now, with these, the marine resource economics, typically these are 2 to 3 years programs. They are now cast as 3 years for both, but I think you are eligible to still apply for a shorter period of time for the marine resource economics if you need to, if you're a little bit closer to the end of your program. They are a little less than $40,000 per year. They do not require as much match. So they're about $38,000 per year for 3 years, and these are restricted to PhD students. The deadlines for these, the one that we are able to confirm today is the Graduate Research Fellowship for Virginia Sea Grant is December 16th at 5 p.m. If you log into eSea Grant, which I recommend doing that soon, you'll be able to see the materials and be able to start uploading things that you might already have done. Your past transcripts, especially undergraduate transcripts, CV, resumes, you can start uploading all that information now and not need to wait. You'll need to wait to hit submit though until your sponsor programs office has signed off on your proposal at your university. We are anticipating that the NIMS deadlines will remain the same, likely sometime in late January, unless they are moved back slightly this year. Like I said, once those are released, we'll be able to update that and confirm those details. So the next steps, if you're planning to apply for either of these, if you haven't told your advisor already, definitely reach out to them, start thinking about potential mentors. If you're curious about mentors, it might be a good fit depending on the professional skills that you want to gain over the next few years. And also the research you're doing, you're welcome to reach out to us. We can think through potential mentors that might be good to consider, or at least good first points of contact as you're trying to think out who might be a good mentor for you to partner with. Review the announcement closely, be aware of those deadlines, and know the guidance documents and the resources you have access to. And like I said, reflect on those professional goals and reach out early to your sponsor programs offices. I mentioned eSea Grant a little bit earlier. It's our application portal. It's all online. If you go to the link below, you'll be able to go ahead and create a user profile. We do get questions occasionally about whether or not the fellow should be listed as the PI. We do request that the student takes the lead in actually submitting their proposal. The nominal PI on the award will be your faculty advisor. Most universities require that the faculty member be the one that actually receives the award, just due to requirements at your universities. But for the application process and putting together your proposal, title page, and everything else, you should list yourself as the PI. When you log on to eSea Grant, you will have to create your user profile if you haven't done so already. There are a number of just kind of confirmational steps in here. If at any point you submit something and you don't get an immediate email request or an update, do feel free to reach out to me on the back end. I can go ahead and create the rest of your user profile if you run into any issues, or for some reason your institution's IT network would block an email coming from the system. That typically does not happen for Virginia applicants, but just in case it does, know that you can reach out, and I'm happy to help you with that. So that's the quick overview. Trying to keep us a little bit on time and background for the 3 different fellowship programs that we're going to be running this year. We are anticipating for the Graduate Research Fellowship to fund 7 or 8 fellows this year. We know there's some interest from across the state, of course, and we're looking forward to being able to support at least that many students. We do occasionally offer some mini grant awards as well for talented students that apply, but we do not have enough funding to go that deep. So you may hear some of our current alumni and fellows talk a little bit about some of those opportunities that they may have been funded before they actually started their fellowship program the next year. And with that, we also received some questions related to, can you apply in multiple years? And you can, if you're not funded in the first year, apply in the subsequent year. You are not limited. The National Science Foundation has changed their GRFP ability to be able to do that, but Virginia Sea Grant, you are able to apply multiple years. So with that, I'd love to introduce our alumni and fellows panel that we have participating. We'll go kind of around the slide real quick and allow our 5 alumni to introduce themselves, share a little bit about their backgrounds. With that, Maura, we have you first. If you'd like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Great. Thanks, Sam. Hi, my name is Maura Boswell. I'm a coastal engineer and a PhD candidate at Old Dominion University. Just a little bit about myself. I worked in the industry as a private consultant in coastal engineering for more than 10 years before I came back to school full time. So my outreach mentor, I was able to meet Shannon Cunniff right before I submitted, I guess, for the graduate research fellowship, because we were on a board together. I didn't really know her very well, but I liked her background. She's with Environmental Defense Fund and was really into natural and nature-based features, and my research is on living shorelines. So to me, it was a good fit to kind of reach out to somebody that had just, our networks were crossing over a little bit. But what's been really great working with Shannon is that she opened a whole new world of networking for me. And that's been a really positive experience with this mentoring program, all the different people she knows and the different committees she serves on and things that she's been involved in. She's been great about anytime we're at conferences, just talking about my research to people and introducing me to a lot of people, and also does it virtually. So now that we've all moved virtually, she's really great about sending out emails and be like, hey, I think you should know this person. They have similar research, or I think you could ping off their research and you'd have a lot in common to discuss that way, which has been really beneficial for expanding my network, which as Sam talked about, it's really future career development. And then to talk about one of the things from that fellowship that has been, unexpected for me was the Alan Alda Communications Workshop. The development by Sea Grant of the entire individual, and not just focusing on your research, but really making sure that in that instance you can communicate your research effectively, since we've seen that communicating science is really important. So having that benefit where Sea Grant has not just funded the research I wanted to do, but really has developed me in my career and made me a more effective science communicator through that. Thanks.
Thank you, Maura. Victoria, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure, thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. My name is Victoria Long. I am a former graduate research fellow, Virginia Sea Grant graduate research fellow. I did my undergraduate at UVA, and I am still at the University of Virginia pursuing my PhD. My background, I would consider myself a coastal ecologist, but my background is focusing on salt marshes and the natural migration of marshes inland, and what that means when there's a farm field in the way of that marsh moving in, and what that means for rural coastal areas like the Eastern Shore of Virginia, where agriculture represents a large portion of the economy. So naturally, I found a mentor within the Virginia Cooperative Extension, and I worked with Ursula Tankard. I actually have a personal connection to Ursula. She also grew up on the Eastern Shore of Virginia, and she works closely with my older sister, who happens to be the Ag Extension agent for the Northern County on the Eastern Shore. So even though Ursula was my official mentor, I worked closely with both the Ag Extension agents on the Eastern Shore because they are more of a team than two separate entities. What was really neat was Ursula was willing to get out in the field with me and helped me set up some of my experiments. She was very hands-on. I remember a day where we were driving up to a field and we just pulled over on the side of the road and started talking to a farmer who was working on his combine. So the opportunities are unexpected at times. Ursula also arranged for me to reach out to farmers outside of those that I would have met through my previous background. So I set up a booth at the annual Eastern Shore Agriculture Conference, where I was able to just talk about my research with growers and landowners in the area, which was a lot of fun. I learned a lot and met some new people. But I think one of the unforeseen highlights as far as professional development goes with this particular fellowship opportunity was I got to tag along with a VIMS Virginia or a VIMS policy field trip to DC, and I got a little look into what the federal policy system looks like, and it actually pushed me to apply for the Canals Marine Policy Fellowship, and I'm a finalist for that. So definitely I used my networking that I gained through the Graduate Research Fellowship to springboard my jump into the policy realm.
Thank you, Victoria. Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen Omori, and I am a PhD candidate at VIMS. I'm part of the NIMS Sea Grant Population and Ecosystem Dynamics Fellowship program, which has been absolutely fantastic. I actually have two NIMS mentors, originally from two different centers that I work both closely with. They have sort of differing expertise, which has been nice to balance both of those with each other. And I've spent, a couple of weeks in Seattle working with one of them, and I was on a long line survey with the other. So I've worked closely with both of them, and they've given me some great experience. But some other highlights that I knew about when I was applying for the program, but really have helped me is actually attending the annual fellowships conference, which is in different NIMS centers around the US, which and these conferences not only help you open the doors to meeting new people at the different NIMS centers, but also with your fellow colleagues who are also a great resource. And now I've been in touch with several people from the program just from these conferences to help me with my project, to bounce ideas off of. And so making those connections early, I think, is really beneficial.
All right, I'm up next, I've been told. I'm Joe Schmidt. I was a fellow from 2015 to 2018, a Virginia Sea Grant Research Fellow. I was at Virginia Tech working on my PhD. I'm currently a research fishery biologist on the Great Lakes with USGS. I'm on Lake Erie. So I'm a fisheries professional at the moment, but I really had a great experience with Virginia Sea Grant. Some of my takeaways were, we had these awesome professional development opportunities related to science communication. And in those, we were kind of able to build, modify, review each other's outreach programs. And for me, the real highlight was, and this was something I wasn't aware of prior to my fellowship, was the opportunity to network with other grad students from other universities, some of which I still keep up with today. And so in my mind, it was far too common as a graduate student to kind of get trapped within your own lab or within your own department. And so this was a really great opportunity to network with other universities across the Commonwealth and really connect with other students that were doing research that was pertinent to mine. I was working with invasive catfishes, so being able to connect with people that were studying parasites in American eel and had background on them and various other organisms in the bay was something that, going into it, I wasn't aware of. The other thing that was a real highlight for me was, the whole Virginia Sea Grant team's willingness to kind of jump in and help you with your outreach. So, and this is probably still the case, but at the time, catfish in Chesapeake Bay, blue catfish and bladder catfish were kind of a hot topic. There was a lot of noise around them, and they set aside time to actually do a story that they featured on their website that kind of highlighted some of the research we were doing at Tech and to kind of get that message out there. And they went above and beyond and kind of blew my mind, really. It was a great experience. And that's all I have. Sorry, I kind of rambled. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. And before Justin goes, I just want to let everybody know. So as you're hearing about the alumni and their experiences, please feel free, if you have questions, go ahead and start putting them into the chat window. And after Justin goes, we'll start answering some of those questions too.
Great, thank you, Sam. I'm Justin Schuller. I'm a PhD candidate at VIMS and a graduate research fellow. I attended William & Mary for my undergrad degree, and now I'm pursuing a PhD in coastal geology at VIMS. So my research focuses on the Virginia Eastern Shore barrier islands in particular. And with that research goal in mind, I reached out early to a mentor who's the director of planning at the Accomack Northampton Planning District Commission. So it's the sort of joint planning district out there on the Eastern Shore. And that was really great. And what's nice is that because the mentor actually moved over to another planning district commission, I was able to pick up now I'm being mentored by the new director. So there's this sort of, by picking an institution rather than just a person, there's this nice transfer that was able to happen. I'm still able to do some outreach with them. And they also put me in touch with the town of Chincoteague, where a lot of my research focuses. And so I think in that process is probably one of the more memorable experiences that I've had with the fellowship, which is being able to tour around the town of Chincoteague on the city manager's golf cart. Which is a very weird, memorable experience. But basically, when I reached out to him ahead of our field work and got the opportunity to sort of go around with him and look at sites that he thought were most susceptible to sea level rise in particular. And then finally, an unexpected aspect, probably a really rewarding one of the fellowship, is the team science training that Virginia Sea Grant hosted. That was a really nice opportunity to sort of develop collaborative relationships with people outside of my own discipline area, so engineers, lawyers, landscape architects, and actually at a dinner one night at the team science training, I ended up hitting it off with a landscape architect who I wasn't even collaborating with for the team science project. And the two of us ended up coming up with this whole field research project together that we executed. And now some of the data that we've worked up is sort of been taken by the city of Norfolk and is being worked up into a bigger plan for that site. So anyways, those are experiences that I would not have had were it not for the fellowship. So I highly encourage everyone to apply. It's an amazing opportunity.
Thank you all. We are going to start relaying some of the questions that we actually had come in during registration and also the ones that are coming in right now in the chat window. So I will ask these first one or two to all the panelists, and then I may direct some specifically to those of you that I think might have some really interesting insight as well. The first question, and maybe we'll do it kind of in the reverse order that you just introduced yourself, is what recommendations do you have for developing a meaningful professional mentorship plan and outreach plan? Justin, can you talk about that first?
Sure. Yeah, I'm very happy to answer that. I think I touched on this very briefly, which is this idea of, Kurt, who was my first mentor, was a very good, strong mentor and someone that I reached out to early. But by working with the Planning District Commission itself and the staff there, it made for this natural pivot when Kurt moved into another position. So I think that's something to keep in mind, is to think about not just a particular person who might be a good mentor, but what kind of organization, could be like the Nature Conservancy, for example, right? That's something with a strong Virginia presence. But if your mentor there were to turn over, there's someone new that would step into that role, and you'd already have relationships with the entire office staff, for example. So I would keep that in mind. I think that's something important to think about.
Joe, would you like to go next?
Yes. Sorry, I got to unmute. To be honest, it kind of seems like it was an eternity ago since I went through the process of setting up my mentorship and outreach plan. But I think the one kind of takeaway that's kind of coming to mind right now would be to be willing to look for a mentor that's maybe not within your immediate sphere. For example, my mentor was a communication outreach specialist that actually worked within the agriculture and crop sciences department at Virginia Tech. Not a fisheries person at all, but he did bring a unique perspective and open my eyes in many ways. So really be willing to kind of get out of your comfort zone in some ways. For me, it was a very beneficial experience to work with him and to get his perspective. And then maybe you can apply that as well.
So I'm going to piggyback off Joe, because I saw all the fellows also nod their heads in saying that looking for a mentor who really broadens your your knowledge. And so somebody not in your immediate field, but somebody related or a new skill that you want to learn really helps sort of bridge, not only help you academically, but with your project, but also bring you different opportunities.
I'm also going to echo Joe and Kristen. What I think something that you may not think of on your own is it doesn't have to be an organization. It doesn't have to be someone in the academic world. You can pick a stakeholder. You can follow a stakeholder around, someone who is going to have a direct connection to whatever you're trying to study. But in that same vein, don't be afraid to pick someone who has a job that you might be interested in doing yourself. So this whole fellowship is about your professional development, and all these networking is a huge part of it as well. So don't be afraid to sort of test the waters, see what's out there. My selection of Ursula wasn't just that she had an in on the Eastern Shore agricultural sphere. I was very interested in education and an outreach job and what that looks like. And that is 85% of what Ursula does. So even if it's not a complete, clear and direct relationship, you can make it that. You can get whatever you want out of this mentorship partnership.
So in addition to how everyone talked about really thinking outside the box, and also to touch on what Justin said, with looking at the team, that I think is really beneficial to see if there's a communication team behind your mentor that can help you. And that's a skill that benefited me from my mentor, was having that communications team that could train me on those skills to really market my research and find different ways to expand my network and get my research out to different networks. And the other thing is, don't be afraid to reach out to somebody that you don't know, but as Victoria said, you might want their job. And if you need a connection, that's a good thing about Sea Grant is they're always willing to make an introduction for you, but it's not a bad idea to reach out to somebody that you don't know at all, but want to get to know.
And I would just add, and those of you who I've met with have heard this a little bit, we generally recommend that you reach out to 2 or 3 people. If you reach out to one, you might come up with some really interesting ideas, but maybe they don't have the bandwidth or the time to be able to take you on as a mentee. But some of those ideas that you might get during a conversation with that person might be great ideas to do with someone else. So you can find and kind of scope out all the possible ideas, and then find the mentor that has the connections, the network, the ability to help you get the experiences and the skills you want to gain. And you can figure out who's going to have the bandwidth to be able to do that with you, and what opportunities exist within each one of those potential opportunities. Also, think about the number of things that you're trying to get done during a 2-year fellowship as you work on your outreach and professional mentorship plan. It's probably not possible to do 20 different things in a 2-year fellowship where you're also working on your graduate research and your degree requirements. So figure out what the right balance is to you. Generally, 2 or 3 really well-detailed and going to be well-executed outreach ideas is a good target to aim for, and talk to your mentor to figure out what those opportunities are. Some of them might focus on your research and how you're going to communicate that through some outreach activities, but some of those should be focused on you and your professional growth and development over the next 2 years plus. And it will be a little bit more centered on helping you get to where you want to be in that 5 or 10-year period. So think about how you balance those, how much work it's going to take into each other. And then as you're looking at your narrative and you're putting it together, think about the level of detail that's going to be important to convey to the review panel, so they can see that you've thought those through, know what it's going to require to execute those. And it's clear to them how they give value to your professional goals that are in your goal statement. The next question that we have for the panelists is, what specific tips do you have for navigating the proposal review process or the actual submission process of putting your materials into EC Grant? So some of the ideas that came up in some of the questions were developing a budget, contacting potential mentors, which Maura was just hitting on, but feel free to expand on some of those ideas.
I can start that one off, because one of the things, kind of piggybacking on talking about the your professional mentor is reach out to them like right away. As Sam said, it might take 2 or 3 before you settle on one, but some of their outreach ideas might be worked into your budget and your schedule. So they might have a great idea for an outreach activity that you are going to want to budget for that you might not have thought of. So that'll have to adjust. And that's one of the things that you want to take care of early on.
Just to add on about the professional mentor, if you get really excited about someone and it turns out that they don't have the time to help you, ask them for a recommendation. Ask if there's someone in their network that they could make an introduction for you for, like, utilize all your contacts. As far as navigating proposal writing and submission process, find a former fellow. I'm happy. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk you through what I did. Look at sample proposals. It's really, I think the one thing I've learned from all my science communication through Virginia Sea Grant is it's a story. It's your story, and it's got to grab people's attention.
I think part of it too is sort of looking out, and when you're reaching out to the mentors and you have like a general idea of what you want to do, or perhaps even a full project form, is reaching out to different mentors and seeing if it aligns with their goals, if it aligns with any of the projects that they're already thinking about, will really help sort of expand and cement that idea. And know also that your projects, even after you get the fellowship, your projects can still change and develop and expand. And so they don't need to be concrete right now, but they need to be at least well researched and demonstrate that the project can be successful and shows sort of an effect, or sort of it can be successful basically in terms of how the project will go. And the mentors will help sort of help you through that process and determine which ideas work well, or which maybe ideas they have tried before and haven't been successful.
I would say, for my experience, the other alumni are touching on some key points about mentor selection, proposal writing. For me, and this wasn't Virginia Sea Grant's fault, I would suggest contacting your office of sponsored programs when you're developing your budget. I remember some logistical problems on Virginia Tech's end of things that took a couple months to get squared away once we were actually awarded. And that was my fault for not reaching out to them initially, but that's just my little tidbit of advice that might be a little different from what you're hearing from the other alumni.
Yeah, I think in that same sort of logistical grain is, start now. Be proactive about like going into the EC Grant website and familiarizing yourself with what that looks like and what you need to upload, right? That seems like simple advice, but I find that even as I've applied to other proposals and things recently, you find yourself just waiting to the last minute to actually click in there, and things just are much more stressful at the last minute. So as much advanced planning as you can do now is going to benefit you in a few weeks when everything's actually due.
And in terms of the actual budget, at least for the NIMS Sea Grant one, there's a 10% wiggle room. So you can actually, you don't have to have a very specific number for travel budget or something. And if you need to add money or subtract money from different areas, that can be done really easily when you work with the person in charge with the money.
Yeah, and just to confirm what that means is, so you'll have potentially $40,000 or $38,000, and within any given line item, so your stipend or travel or something, you can move money between those generally up to 10% of the total award. So if your total award is $80,000, then you could move, $7,999 from one line item into the other. And we like to know that as a funder, so we can expect that that's coming in, but you don't have to rebudget or make any big changes until you hit that threshold. You'll have a number of really, I think, good, helpful tips as well. And I would say overarching things like, I already referenced that we have guidance documents and templates on there that are specifically targeted to make this process extremely easy on all of our applicants. But don't forget, your advisors have all written proposals before. Things like data management plans, budgets, they may have some of these materials sitting around that you can look at as a guide. And it's a great thing for an advisor to be able to work with their student, share those and have conversations. You should not be creating your entire proposal from scratch on your own. You should be leveraging your resources, whether that's your advisor, your professional mentor, or potentially past materials they've used for proposals, because those things are going to look very similar if it's a data management plan or maybe a budget justification. So those can be very helpful to have for reference. So with that, we did get one question, and I'd be curious to hear the alumni's reflections on this too, because of course, we're hosting this webinar virtually this year. Normally, we would actually be on campuses hosting some of these conversations in person. There's uncertainty because of COVID-19 over travel and how you should budget for that. My general recommendation so far for applicants is think about all the opportunities that you would love to be able to do in kind of normal conditions. Write your proposal thinking with those things in mind, that that's what you're going to execute, because the fellowship start date would not be until September 1st of 2021 for graduate research fellows. So it's just a little bit earlier than that for NIMS fellows. We hope that there's a different normal by that point, but also within your proposal, just as kind of a backup, clearly defining that you've thought about this for all the reviewers, put in a couple sentences just saying, in case, we're in different circumstances at that period of time, we're not able to do some of these activities in person, then we will look for virtual options for some of those activities. And I'd be curious, and I'll maybe hit on a little bit more of this question a little bit later, but thoughts and reflections that the 5 of you have for how you've transitioned over the last 7.5 months with COVID to still executing some of your activities, those of you that have been continuing to work on your fellowship programs over those months?
I suppose that I have been affected in that I wasn't able to get into the lab once COVID hit. So I was set back for maybe 3 or 4 months, but overall, I think that, I just had to pivot and focus on other things that I could accomplish. So it's just, maintaining flexibility and knowing that things will get done, reaching out to your support system. And if you're struggling with something, ask your mentor or your advisor, and really, utilize that support system that comes with being a fellow.
Yeah, I think adding on to that a little bit is, I also had to adapt in terms of lab work in some ways, because geology does not require, well, not all geology requires a clean lab. My driveway became a temporary lab, but in addition to that, it made me start to think about what new skills I could develop too. And I think that's one of the huge benefits of this fellowship is you're not tied to an advisor's grant. So there's still an expectation of completing things from your advisor, as there should be. And of course, you'll be self-motivated to do those things anyways, but it gave me the time to think about what I wanted to set myself up for in the next career stage. And so I was able to focus a little bit on remote sensing and sort of remote shoreline change work, as well as actually start to go back through some of my data that I had collected even before or at the very start of my fellowship, and start to rework that and think about it in new ways. So this skill building around GIS is something I spent time on. And then the other thing is it gave me the flexibility and the time to reach out to people that I might not have thought to reach out to before. So I ended up in touch with some folks at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, as well as the DC, Maryland Nature Conservancy, talking about how I could relate the research I was doing on the barrier island side of things back to the marshes behind those barrier islands. So I think the main point there is just that this fellowship really does give you the flexibility that, should we remain in this weird semi-virtual world of everything being online, that it gives you time to learn new skills and reach out to people you might not have thought to reach out to before, that you couldn't have, I couldn't have probably driven all the way out to Maryland to meet with someone from the Maryland Nature Conservancy, but it was easy to hop on a Zoom call a couple times. So anyways, keep that kind of stuff in mind too, as how you could pivot if you need to in the coming months.
Another thing, since you're talking about not having funds for traveling, you might actually be able to attend more conferences and share your research at more places than you would have been able to, or even attend a conference like the International Conference on Coastal Engineering just went virtual, and that one was in Sydney, Australia. So I wasn't going to that, but it was really cool to be able to attend that one virtually because they pivoted. And that was another opportunity for me to keep up to speed on the latest things like that. But you could take those kind of opportunities and be able to attend a virtual conference somewhere across the world that you wouldn't have had the funding to do.
I would say we have some students that they were planning to do stuff and be in classrooms. And of course, classrooms is not somewhere where students could be over the last 7 months. Most students weren't in classrooms, but we were even able to help some of our fellows start to partner with other people that were doing more science outreach kind of activities and more K through 12 or teacher training type activities where they could translate the research into lesson plans, and they could guild some of those same skills they were trying to get. They ended up getting their materials and their lesson plans and activities actually out to more people than they would have originally, because they spent their time and energy doing some of those activities, still working with their mentor and getting advice on the best way to do some of those things. They weren't necessarily just executing them in a classroom. They were thinking about, how do you do this in a virtual setting, or how do I make this different product? And then of course, a lot of the resource managers and a lot of the kind of panel meetings and stuff, a lot of those things are still happening. They're just happening in a virtual setting. So it gives you more time because you don't have to drive, but maybe you can meet with your mentor, do a conversation up front to think about, okay, what's going to play out in this meeting? And then you can go to it, and on the back end debrief with them. So why that person asked that really pointed question when you were presenting on that, where did that come from? And get that takeaway, that knowledge and understanding with them in the same amount of time that might have taken Justin to drive just to get up to Maryland, much less actually participate in the conversation and get those before and after meetings with their mentor. With that, we have about 4 minutes left before the top of the hour. So I am going to stay on, and I am happy for any of the attendees that want to stay on and ask questions that are specific to you, whether it's about your degree program and your proposal and how do you make that relevant to Virginia Sea Grant, or thinking through mentors. And we have all the registration questions. We've hit on a bunch of them, but we still have a couple left. But first, I'd like to say thank you to our panelists. So even if you just want to use the chat window and say thank you, we'd appreciate that, because they took time out of their day to join us. And I'd like the panelists, if they would, to leave us with one tip, one recommendation that you wish you would have known at about this point when you were putting together your application, that you'd like to share with the potential applicants that are joining us today. And maybe we can go reverse alphabetical again. Justin, that puts you a little bit on the spot, but if you don't mind, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I'm happy to be on the spot. I think the one tip that I would leave you with is, and Sam briefly touched on this idea, is to be realistic with what outreach you actually can do. Even in hindsight now, I think that parts of my outreach plan were overly ambitious, and certainly now have been affected by the COVID world. But, think about how you can think about quality over quantity, and how you can really maximize a few key outreach things that you want to do, and really talk to your mentor about what are the few key meetings you could go to, for example. So I'll leave you with that. Thanks.
My advice would be to just step outside of your comfort zone, be that with your mentor selection. I went with someone in a different department, be that with your outreach events. I had I had a whole myriad of different presentations I gave, one to the Virginia Anglers Club, one at the Science Museum of Virginia, things that I normally wouldn't have done. As a fisheries scientist, you're often kind of stuck at these, local AFS meetings, national AFS meetings. various wildlife conferences. But those were really rewarding experiences. So yeah, just step outside of your comfort zone.
I'm going to go a slightly different branch, but you never know who the reviewers are going to be for these research proposals, as Sam knows. So just keep trying and evolve your project to sort of fit, you know, what main questions other people might have that are hot topics right now, or maybe projects that have been put aside by other people that you know want to be answered eventually. Those are usually ones that they're really interested in, but to keep trying and make sure to start early so you can develop these ideas really well.
I think my advice would be to take advantage of all the resources that you have, whether that's what Virginia Sea Grant provides, or speaking to a former fellow, or, you know, making sure your advisor is giving you the attention you need, getting your questions answered. But also, you know, it's not a bad idea that once you think you have a general framework, set up a meeting with Sam and make sure that you're on the right path, because it's a whole lot easier to change course at the beginning than it is to have to redo the whole thing at the end. So just definitely read through everything, go check out the portal, give yourself a good foundation before you start building up.
Okay, so as an engineer, I'm going to go really practical with this answer. Look at your schedule, like figure out from your school when you need to have the papers into the research fountain. At ODU, it's the Research Foundation office, like what those deadlines are, because you really don't want to pass that deadline. You want to make sure you're getting all your paperwork in time.
Yep, and I would only add into that, when you ask them what that deadline is, make sure you know, like I said earlier, what they actually need to see and review. Because you might be thinking, okay, I got to put together, you know, X number of pages. Some of that's transcripts and things that they might not need to see. So you might not need to focus your energy on that over the coming, you know, 3 weeks or so as you're putting together a proposal. But they're going to want to see the budget and the narrative and the budget justification for sure. So figure out what those are. With that, like I said, I am going to stick around. We have at least 5 or 6 other questions that came in during the registration process that I think are really good. And if there are people that are interested in those, I will cover those. I'll encourage everybody who's staying on to go ahead and turn on their videos and stuff, so you can ask me questions directly. We can talk through those. With that though, Maura, Joe, Victoria, Justin, Kristen, thank you all so much for participating. Always a pleasure to see all of you, but I think your insight was very, very much taken to heart by a lot of the attendees, and they're really excited to hear that perspective. So have a wonderful evening, everyone, and thanks again.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Sam.
So for those of you who are interested in staying on, I will review a couple questions as kind of placeholders, because I know some of you are asking those specifically. But if you have a question, go ahead and use a little emoji, throw your hand up, and I will answer yours or shoot them in the chat. You can definitely turn off or unmute yourselves and turn on your audio if you want to ask any of those. I think one question that we didn't really get to, but I think a lot of people are interested in kind of talking through, is really about eligibility. I started to hit on this a little bit as we were going through kind of the focus areas at the beginning of the webinar. So we have our 3 focus areas that are kind of a little bit more research related generally. And those are sustainable seafood and aquaculture. So if you're doing fisheries kind of based work, resilient communities and economies, that's a really broad one that people don't think necessarily on how broad it can be. Of course, we normally think about inundation, sea level rise, coastal resiliency issues, but there's a lot of environmental justice issues, social issues that can get into that one as well. So depending on what you're thinking about and focus on, that one, and then healthy coastal ecosystems is very broad as well, and also healthy communities. So you can definitely think about those, and feel free to ask questions if you want to talk about how your research might align with those. With that, know that you don't necessarily have to be doing your research specifically in Hampton Roads or Virginia. We do fund students that are working on migratory species that go through the Mid-Atlantic, or people that are doing research, but for some reason, whether that's the work with mentorship or the research is being funded to be done in Maryland or in Delaware, but the results of that are relevant to Virginia stakeholders and the Commonwealth of Virginia itself. And that perspective, that knowledge can be used in some way with your professional mentor as you're doing your outreach. So maybe your outreach is really focused on getting information out to Virginia stakeholders, but your research you're actually doing is maybe in a surrounding state. You're still potentially doing research that's relevant to Virginia. And I can talk with you specifically about how you might shape and frame that to make sure that you're not leaving any questions potentially standing for reviewers that are going to look at it. And they might be thinking, well, if this person's doing research there, how's this relevant to Virginia? We want to make sure that you're thinking about the questions in advance that they may ask, so you can address those in your proposal materials. With that, I will go through some others, but what questions do all of you have? And about 20 of you have stayed on the meeting, so I'm assuming that you do have some questions out there.
Hello, Sam. Hello, everyone. I'm Renisha Blake, and I'm currently a second-year student at Old Dominion University, and I'm interested in applying for the Virginia Sea Grant Fellowship this year, for next year. And I do have a couple questions. As a matter of fact, I did meet with my prospective mentors today. Luckily, I identified 2 persons that would be great for those 2 positions. So we had a meeting with them just to go through the fine prints and just to see what we need to get in place. I have 2 main questions. I had others, but they were discussed earlier, so thankfully for that. The first one is that I'm looking to graduate in 2022. So that would give me a year in the fellowship. My colleague now, she's a fellow, and I know that we discussed that it's mainly for 2 years. So I was just wondering if there is any circumstances where a fellow can be or can have that grant for just 1 year. So that's my first.
We currently support a fellow that is a single year fellow, and actually we just had one finish up for graduate program. It's actually in a similar position as Victoria. He got to meet today. He's actually getting ready to leave and go up for canals. There are a couple things that I would recommend at least considering. One is you're adding a little bit of work when it comes to the fellowship program because you're doing this mentor relationship, you're thinking about outreach products. So if you're interested, it doesn't mean that you can't ask for more than just a single year. So think about, am I going to tack on an extra summer? Am I going to want that flexibility? Because if you budget it now in the proposal phase, then it will be available to you that semester, that summer that you may need it. So keep that in mind if it makes sense as you talk to your mentors and advisor. Additionally, with that, the important thing to keep in mind is, you are proposing 1 year. That year, I know how fast a single year goes. So think about those things that are most important to get done, and think about where you are in your graduate program as well, because you're going to be probably taking less courses, which means you might have more time for outreach or less, depending on how much writing you're doing, how much is kind of left. And frame it around that. Your professional goal statement might look a little bit different than an incoming PhD student, because now you are not taking in as many courses, but you might have a better idea what you want to do next. So you might be more specific in your application materials than a student who's entering a graduate program for a master's degree would be potentially. And the reason I'm saying all that is because based on past experiences in review panels, the reviewers have a sliding scale in some ways for what their expectations are for a student's getting ready to finish a PhD versus somebody that's coming out of a bachelor's. And they're thinking about like, okay, so how much should you have gotten done? Or, how much should you be thinking about, okay, I'm here at this point into my PhD, here's what I think I'm going to do next, and having some specific goals and objectives for that point in time in your graduate program. So is that helpful?
Very helpful, very, very helpful. Second question, last question for now, is that I am currently the vice president for ODU Monarch Mappers, which is the youth arm of the basically youth mappers. And we do use GIS software to aid humanitarian mapping. So I was wondering if my outreach aspect could be linked to this organization that I'm already a part of.
It can be, and especially if you're considering the outreach part of that, if there are ways to kind of leverage that. The one consideration that I would put is, as the review panels are looking at the materials, they want to see kind of the growth opportunities, kind of the new and the innovative parts of what you're going to do through your professional mentorship, and also sometimes through your outreach activities. And those should be new and different, or at least they should be highlighted as being different than what you would normally do for your graduate program and what you've been doing as written out on your CV. So for instance, as you're thinking about mentors, or you're thinking about outreach plans, you know, if you're already part of an organization, or if you've been working with a mentor for a number of years, maybe during your undergrad even, but you want to start working with them again for various reasons, you want to make sure that you're kind of hitting on why this is different from the past experience that you've had. So you can think about that in a couple of different ways. You can think about, you know, your professional goal statement and, you know, where you want to grow and what you want to do next. And you're kind of highlighting and setting the stage in there for what the review panel will end up seeing in your outreach plan. You might want to talk to your advisor and let them know, hey, I've worked with this person. When the review panel looks at my CV, they're going to see this in here, but I'm limited by pages, by word limits, et cetera, in my materials. Your letter would be a great spot to call out why this is different than what I've done in the past. So from a grant writing perspective, you can think about, how do you leverage your advisor's letter and let them know this is something they can call out as different. And similarly, you know, your mentor should kind of do the same. If you've worked with your mentor before, whether if they were a past employer, or they worked at the same university or science center, you know, research lab, whatever that was, make sure they say, oh, we have a relationship, but what we're going to do through this fellowship is different than that in these ways. So the review panel is not looking at, oh, well, they lean back on somebody they already have a relationship with. They know what's different because you've made it very clear to them.
Okay, thank you very much, Sam.
Other questions?
This is kind of a small question. But I'm just wondering, the person at the Office of Sponsored Programs or whatever it is at the specific university, how would you know that they approved the budget? Should they sign off on it, or is this a step just to prevent any problems in the future?
Yes, there's kind of two ways. The first is you're talking to your advisor, they're going to know the appropriate sponsor programs contact for NOAA or for Sea Grant, you know, however your university defines that. And they'll direct you to work with them. And typically what happens is your advisor will work with you and your business manager to develop a budget, and then that'll go to the sponsor programs office for their kind of final internal review. For Virginia Sea Grant side, as you think about the application elements and just making sure that you're kind of laying everything out and have everything documented, one of the required elements is a signed title page. And one of the signatures that will be on there is from your sponsor programs office. So make sure that they're aware that they will need to digitally or, you know, hand sign it and give that back to you and request that it's back at least 24 hours before that 5 p.m. deadline. So that if you have any issues, you can make sure that you can have them corrected and do it. The signatures that are required on the title page, just to make sure that's really clear, it's laid out in the RFP, but it needs to have your signature, your advisor's signature, mentor, and OSP kind of listed out on there. That way it's clear that everybody has kind of done a final review.
Okay, I have one last question before you go. Hello, Dr. Sam. How you doing? So I just wanted to ask about recommendations. Yeah. So I know in the proposal in what has been given to us, we are supposed to first of all develop at least 3 of them. I think one should be a letter of commitment from our professional mentor, and then one from our advisor, and then one other one. So, and I know it's going to be 2 that will be used in the end. So what are the tips? What do you say? How do you suggest we pick out those ones apart from one other one, apart from the one from our advisor?
Yeah, so to confirm, so there's 3 letters that are part of your application. So there's one from your major professor or advisor. There's someone, your second letter is coming from someone that can speak to you and write a strong letter recommendation, but it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that's affiliated with your university. That's the one that we recommend, choose someone who can talk to you from a different, or talk about you from a different perspective, to share that different insight. And then, yeah, you're right. The third one is coming from your professional mentor. And that one we call a letter of commitment. So all 3 of those letters would be part of the review process. The technical review panel and the interviewers during the final stage, if you make it to that stage, would be reviewing all 3 of those. If you were to submit more than those letters, just so everyone's clear, then what would happen is we would be reviewing your materials after the deadline, and we would reach out to you to confirm that we've received too many letters. Your major professor has to submit 1. And then your professional mentor is going to have 1 that's under consideration. If we have more than that, we'll ask you which other letter would you like. And the only information that we could share as a program is essentially their name and ask you to confirm which ones you would like included in your package.
Okay, so just to be clear, you're going to be reviewing all 3 of them, except the extra ones.
Yep, your major professor, your second letter recommendation, and the letter of commitment from your mentor, all 3 will be reviewed. And with that, all 3 will be reviewed both within the technical review panel and the final interview stage. Leanna, you asked a question, I believe, a little bit earlier that we hit on most of it, but we didn't necessarily hit on all of it. And it was kind of thinking through your budget. So some students at some universities, stipend and tuition costs will make up a full $40,000 per year because the rates are high enough that you start to hit up on that number. You want to reduce that a little bit. So part of maybe your stipend or your tuition would get covered by the university or advisor department, et cetera, so that you can have money left over for travel, at least enough to attend some Virginia Sea Grant events, the professional development events, or something that's more like our graduate symposium, et cetera, within each year. So you have a little money to play with there. If you have other resources that are covering some of those costs, so you might only need your tuition funding and then you're budgeting money for other types of professional development activities and time to go spend and travel to go to conferences or be with your mentor, et cetera, you are able to do that. There is not really necessarily a cap on how much those are within the program. The only real requirement with the budgets is you'll see eligible and ineligible costs. And the goal of the fellowship program really is to support the student. So it's to cover those tuition, professional development costs, your stipend, salary costs, things like that. So research costs and stuff are not necessarily in there for everybody, just to make sure that you know that as you're preparing your budgets. So you'll really be hitting on those student professional development costs are what you should be aiming for. Note that health insurance, if there are things that are more like training, that may be related to your research. I know ArcGIS and Esri and stuff were mentioned a little bit earlier. If that's something professionally that you want to gain as a skill, those are things that you could put into your budget. An Esri training, going to a conference or professional development training to get more experience, you'd be able to apply for those.
Thank you.
I have a couple of sort of detail-oriented questions. One's about the data management plan. I just wanted to confirm that even though there's a NOAA data sharing policy and there is a form associated with that form doesn't have to be submitted. We just have to use that form as guidance for what to include in the management plan. Is that correct?
That's right. So there's a couple things in your data management plan that are highlighted in that NOAA guidance that you really want to make sure you convey. If there are questions, some of those are things that if you were selected as a fellow and there was a question there, we would come back and say, hey, we need to detail this a little bit more too. What you want to make sure that you capture in there, first and foremost, is you want to convey that you are going to essentially back up your data, what that method is, you know, and I would strongly encourage you to think broader than just, I'm going to back it up on external hard drives or jump drives somewhat regularly. Think about the resources available to you through the university. Are there servers? Are there automatic backup software? Something can be done on a regular basis just to preserve your data and make sure that if something happens, you know that it's going to be saved. In addition to that, there is a policy for NOAA that within 2 years, essentially the end of your award, you do need to make that information publicly available at least a fairly inexpensive, if not free rate. So there's a lot of ways to do that as well. Your advisors probably already do this because they have NOAA or National Science Foundation or NIH awards, et cetera. And in that process, you know, there are a lot of databases and systems out there that you can upload your information, metadata, and everything too. As university students, you can also talk to your university's library system because chances are they have a way for you to make that data publicly available too through the library system that will come with no cost generally. And that's something that they may even have on their website or text that you can just download and say, okay, this is my plan for distribution of the data after the project is over.
Awesome. And then I was also wondering about how detailed the budget justification for travel should be, if it needs to be broken down by food per diem, lodging per diem, mileage, or if we can just come up with an estimate of what that trip might cost overall and then ask for that amount.
Yeah, so sponsor programs offices and business managers like a level of detail to varying degrees. And so I can't broadly say that you have to go this detailed. But if you looked in the guidance document that's on our website, you'll see 1 or 2 examples that do break it down for specific trips, conferences that you know you're going to go to, or professional development. If you know that, you know, twice during a year, you're going to partner with somebody who's in Miami-Dade County, and you're going to go down for some resiliency conference that they're going to be hosting, go ahead and budget for that. And those are not hard costs to estimate. You know, it's probably going to be out $300 flight. The per diem rates are well known kind of in advance. So you're at least in the ballpark for what those costs are. And that's helpful to kind of have that level of detail. So you make sure that you don't underestimate the cost and then find out later, ooh, I didn't have enough plan for those events that I knew I was going to go to.
Awesome. Thanks.
We had a few questions come in that are related to review criteria, which I hit on a little bit earlier. I think with that, there's also a question about qualifiers and disqualifiers. And I think it was Victoria that might have pointed out that you never know what a review panel is going to focus on or, you know, gravitate towards in your material. So it's impossible to kind of predict what's going to be a successful proposal in the beginning, or even if you partner with this mentor, you're guaranteed to get the fellowship because of X reason. However, do remember just the review structure process. You have to get past the relevancy review in order to get to the technical review panel. So if you can't tie your research to being relevant to Virginia or your outreach plan and make that clear, then those stakeholders as external advisors, you know, won't put that the research is relevant, and thus it'll be harder to make that first stage to second stage. So keep those kinds of things in mind. I hit on a little bit of this earlier when I was talking about your letter of collaboration from your mentor. You know, it's really important that they're aware of what's in your proposal and they're mirroring up some of that language with what's in their letter of commitment. So it's clear to the review panel that, you know, those ideas are stuff that they're going to be able to help you execute. And in some ways, the proposal process can sometimes come down to that letter of commitment. If a letter is submitted and it's not clear that that relationship exists, generally it's going to be really hard, just based on the evaluation criteria and the scoring, to get into that top tier to be interviewed when the reviewers are looking at it and they're unsure if this relationship is actually as strong as it's suggested it is in the proposal. So I wouldn't call that a disqualifier for any means, but it is something that we see a lot of the scores getting ranked out based on the relationships that is there and the novelty to what you're proposing to do with them. and that novelty being for you, for your growth, for your research, for your professional development. Those were the majority of the questions. And I think we hit on a couple of the ones that we didn't touch on a little bit earlier. Let me just skim through one last time. And if anybody has a question, please go ahead and raise your hand or shout it out.
Okay, Sam, I could ask another question, just something based on what you said earlier, but I just want to be clear. So you did say that as it relates to the 1 year, it's okay to budget in summer as well. So how would that be treated? Would it just be that, okay, you're going over into, or that would be a 1 year. So would that be, do you count the years based on academic year, or do you count it based on like a calendar year?
Sure. So the start date will be September 1st of 2021. So then it will go all the way around to August 31st, 2022. Part of the reason I said that too is if you were planning to graduate in May of 2022, then technically you could have less than 1 year of fellowship, but I'd encourage you to include the summer as well. And then with that, yes, it could be, it could go to December. So that's tacking on, all of September, October, November, and December. So you're actually putting in a 16-month proposal. Or maybe it only goes to May and then it tacks on, the additional, 5 months in the spring. That doesn't go back around August 31st. So yeah, so weigh that depending on where you are in your program, and also be conservative, like I mentioned before. We've had students that have come to us later and said, yeah, I really wish I would ask for that extra semester. It was one of the things that we were really interested to see how COVID played out. We weren't sure if students were going to need more time or if they were actually going to speed up their academic timelines by shifting what would have been fieldwork based chapters to actually be more like meta-analysis or computer-based analysis, so they don't have to put the time in doing fieldwork or processing samples, etc. Jim, I see a question came in from you as well. Let's see. Are we allowed to include professional fees for outreach plan? For example, if I wanted to include an artist graphical designer to create materials, will that be awarded? That is not a cost that we traditionally get. It's not one of the eligible costs. If you were doing a subaward out, it might be something that we could consider, but I would encourage you maybe to take a different approach to it if you can. And is there an opportunity maybe for you to be able to work with that person potentially and actually get training on graphical design? And actually, if Jay is still on, I will also at least give him some kudos because he is currently coordinating a Design 101 professional development course for our fellows. So some of that design elements you've heard our fellows kind of talk about, Virginia Sea Grant can support you in X ways. Sometimes that's actually through our communications program or professional development activity. Jay, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we're actually getting ready to do one in December. So any of our fellows would be, eligible to show up for that. It's just going to be a webinar this time. Unfortunately, you can't do it in person. And during this training, we're going to actually kind of let the fellows guide their own projects as needed towards the work that they're doing. So if they need, if they know they need a PowerPoint presentation, we can help them work on designing things like that. Or if they need like a one-page fact sheet, we'll help them do things like that. So overall, I'm just kind of giving a basic kind of Design 101 workshop. And then we, of course, once you're a fellow, we're always here to help out anybody who needs it. So at any time, any of the fellows can feel free to ask for any kind of assistance on design from us.
And I didn't necessarily talk about them as we went through, but our communications program, one, is amazing. Two, we've done similar type of professional development activities in the past that have focused even on stop motion videos and some like whiteboard animations and stuff like that which we have some experience supporting students doing some of those things in the past, at least enough to be able to guide you a little bit in considerations and where you might want to look for resources and things like that, even if it's not something that we would actually be leading the training on necessarily. So those might be other resources we kind of point you towards too. So Jim, I guess my response is I would plan to budget the funds for you, because that's really the goal of the fellowship program, but know that there are resources and opportunities you could probably leverage to do some of the things you're thinking about that wouldn't actually require funding if you're awarded a fellowship. They would actually be things that we would try to support you as a fellow.